This is Hunter Lehman with Sportable, and you are listening to the Six Wheels Consulting Podcast with Matthew Shapiro.
Sweet.
Welcome to the Sixth Wheels Consulting Podcast, dialoguing disability and discussing difference, inclusion, and all abilities in today's world. Now here are your hosts, Matthew Shapiro and Bob Nolly.
Hey there, welcome back everybody. How are you? I think things are going good. I hope they are for you. Hey, this is going to be part 2 of the episode 33 interview we did with Emily Deaton and Carolanne Monteleone. They had a great conversation with Matthew about the disability community and the issues that they have seen as well. And it was so great, we expanded it and we cut it in 2 for you. So you're going to get part 2 of that today. So that having been said, let's go ahead and get them on right now. So, you know, Matthew, you're talking here and you were kind of saying it tongue in cheek, but not really, I bet, about fomenting another revolution here. You know, we talked in the past about the idea that the disability community overall, seems kind of fractured within itself. I don't mean from the outside people, judging it. I mean, people that are disabled going, we have to get our act together.
Yeah, I mean, and I would love to know both of your perspectives on that. I've always said that, like, we're very siloed in how we, as a community, like, go about asking for things, rather than like unifying around, like, yeah, I'm somebody that has CP, or I'm somebody that has a chronic illness, or I have autism. Like, so right now, like, those different communities are fighting for those pots of money rather than being a unified front. And I think that prevents us from having that positive outcome. Would you agree?
Okay.
Sure.
I think that, like you said, a lot of people with different conditions will, again, focus on their particular condition, especially if people aren't necessarily as involved in the disability community as a whole. It's easy to get very focused on just the condition you have, which is completely understandable, of course, if you're living with it, and especially conditions that don't have as much research or just very little is known about them. But I do think overall I agree with you, Matthew, just because, like you were saying, we're all fighting towards a future that is more inclusive and accessible, and the things that could help one person, like, for example, if, like, people with autism tend to get sensory overload, just like people with dysautonomia tend to get sensory overload, which is the condition I have. And so these things could help, multiple people and with different conditions. And so the things that a lot of communities are fighting for could benefit the disability community as a whole.
Right. That's really cool. So do you both view yourself, because I know sometimes I think this, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but, like, I think where, at least I have seen that there's a, and Carolanne, this is really based off a lot of your social media posts, because you do a really good job on social media, like, trying to connect that chronic illness does equal disability, but I think sometimes society doesn't put those two together. So do you both view yourself as disabled in some kind of way, obviously, if that question makes sense? Sorry, that was unclear.
Yes, no, I definitely consider myself disabled, but I will admit that it took me many years to do so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because when you join the chronic illness community, there's this weird, like, elephant in the room that, like, no one wants to say the word disability, or no one wants to admit to being disabled. And, I only have gastroparesis, or I only have dysautonomia, or, and that's true for some people. Some people have chronic illness in a mild severity. And so for them, it doesn't impact their daily life quite as much as it does for others. But for people like Emily and I, hopefully it's okay that I speak on her behalf for this.
Yes,
part,
yeah,
but,
I agree with you.
For people like us, our chronic illness is so severe that it is a disability, and it impacts every facet of our life. So it took me a while to come to the conclusion that, you know what, yeah, I'm chronically ill, but I'm also disabled, and they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me too, Caroline, it took me a while to sort of be okay with calling myself disabled and just sort of coming to the realization that, like, all right, my chronic illness isn't going away. This is something that I'm going to have to learn to live with, and I'm going to have to learn to advocate for myself. But for me, and I do agree, like you said, I think some people have chronic illnesses that don't affect them in their daily life, or that they have, periods of remission. And but for me, I do consider myself disabled. Like, I'm disabled by my chronic illness, and it did take a while for me to accept that. But now, yeah, I kind of definitely view them as being very similar.
How long was that fight? How long was that road for you to get down to that point?
For me, it took me about a year to get diagnosed. And so I think up until I was diagnosed, I had some bit of hope that maybe my condition would get better, or that there would be a treatment that would, alleviate my symptoms completely. And when I was eventually diagnosed, I would say I went to college several months after being diagnosed. And so I think when I had to start asking for accommodations and start advocating for myself in college, around then is when I started to more identify with being disabled, and I became more okay with viewing myself as disabled.
Sure.
Carolanne, how about you?
For me, it took me quite a few years. I would say probably close to 2 years. It wasn't until I got a feeding tube that it kind of cemented it for me for some reason. It was this medical device that I relied upon to live my daily life.
Sure.
And to me, I kind of equated that to be something similar to like a wheelchair. Like, someone who needs a wheelchair, they need the wheelchair to live and to live the most productive and healthy life they can. And for me, I needed the feeding tube to live the most healthy and productive life I could. And when I made that kind of comparison and saw the similarities, I said, yeah, this is definitely some form of disability, because there's multiple different forms, of course. But all disabilities don't look the same. And when you don't see that representation in the media of someone with a disability that looks perfectly healthy, you don't think that you can be disabled and look perfectly healthy, even if you're not.
Well, and Carolanne, one of the things I love, because I follow you on social media and you're very active there. One of the things I love is just like how open and honest you are in like showing your feeding tube system. Because like in a lot of your social media posts, you put that right on blast, and like that to me is super refreshing and like really, really like makes you feel good to see that. And I know that's a big thing that's happening within the community too, is like people owning those systems and other disabilities where you have a device that might be shown and other things, and people owning that is just really, really cool to see.
Yeah, I think it's very important. For me, before I got my feeding tube, I didn't see a lot of people posting and showing their feeding tube. And if they did, it was in a very negative light. And I wanted to be that role model, or a person that someone could look up to and say, wow, she has a feeding tube and it's not half bad. It's something, it's something that enables her to continue and live her life and be a member of society. And without it, I would not be here today. Right. So to me, it's the thing that saves my life every single day on a daily basis. And I'm proud of it. And I want to normalize bodies that look different and have different devices, because I think that's very important for, younger generations coming up to know that it's okay to look different or to be different.
Sure.
And I think it's, sorry. No, I was going to say, I think it's really great, Carolanne, that you have that perspective, because I know for me, like when I started using a cane, for example, I felt really kind of, I guess, ashamed of it and just like, oh, this is something that's, going to make me stand out or make me, look weird or whatever. And today I'm really grateful for it, and I love, like, I decorate my canes for like Christmas and things like that, and yeah, and I'm really appreciative of it, and I'm grateful that I have access to mobility devices. And I think viewing, whether it's a mobility aid or like a cane or a feeding tube in a positive light can really benefit just the way that people with disabilities live.
Yeah, and it's awesome that you both bring that up in that way, because like one of the ways I sort of frame that whole piece is like my disability is like my badge of courage, right? It's the thing that it's sort of like a little bit of an armor for me, right? It's an aspect, like, yes, it brings me challenge, and people often ask me like, what, like particularly young kids, like, what is this weird contraption that he has strapped to his butt that he uses to move around? But like I own that, and the fact that you both are like, that's really cool that we're all kind of in that same world where it's like, yeah, but we need these things, whether it's your feeding tube, Carolanne, or your cane, Emily, or my wheelchair. Like, we need these things in order to live our lives and be successful, which we're all doing, which is great. But I want to pivot back to something, and I wanted to touch on this. We were talking about like the misperceptions between like chronic illness versus disability. Why do you think that society has those misperceptions, and like where you all have said, yes, I am disabled, some other people might not? Like, why do you think there's a disconnect there? Carolanne, we can start with you.
I think it really boils down to lack of representation. When you see someone in the media or even on social media or anything like that with a disability, it's always someone with some sort of mobility aid or someone who's an amputee. There's never someone, shown with a disability that might not be visible. And I understand that's for reasons because that'd be very difficult to show. Mm-hmm. And, most of the people who are disabled do use some type of mobility aid or, some kind of assistive device. But with the lack of representation, it makes people hesitant, I think, to call themselves disabled because they don't want someone saying you're a liar or you're not disabled, you're a fake. And being not believed is one of the worst feelings in the whole entire world. And people with invisible chronic illnesses go through that every single day. You have that, like Emily said earlier, you have that constant need to prove that you're sick to yourself, to your family, to your friends, to your doctors, and it gets exhausting. That's for sure.
That's a great point. I jotted down a question here that I wanted to insert, but you all circled right up to it without even the narrowest of prompts here, and that was the fact that Matthew and I have talked about, he's taken the time and he has a response to somebody that comes up to talk to him and either says, does, or asks the wrong thing. And depending on whether they're an adult or a child or whatever the situation is, at this point in his life, it's almost like he just pushes play and it comes out of his mouth because it's automatic.
Right.
I was just guessing before that conversation started that for the disabled with a chronic illness that may not be as readily visible on the surface, that may be harder to do. Mm-hmm. That response, may be harder to get on your tape deck so you can just push play when somebody does or said or asks the wrong thing.
To add to that, is it a situation where once you have both become comfortable in your situation, you're able to draw on, and you're able to respond to those types of questions a lot easier?
I think for me, it depends a lot on the situation. And I think for me, it's a lot easier sometimes to answer questions from children and things like that, just because you can explain something very simply and they'll just be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, and move on. It's not as much of a big deal a lot of the times. And sometimes, again, for me, when someone asks a question, I sort of explain, oh, I have a chronic illness, that doesn't always connect with people. I don't know that they always understand what that means. And so, and again, I look, perfectly healthy And I think people are confused as to why sometimes I'm using a mobility aid, and that it is a little harder sometimes to come up with a concise reason to sort of explain to people, a chronic illness that is very complex, and just explaining the ways that it can affect me day to day when, like, you're just going grocery shopping or something. Right. So, I think it's harder in some respects, and especially like Carolanne was saying, when you have an invisible illness or you look healthy, it's hard to kind of explain to people that, like, yes, you are still disabled, and that yes, you do need, this mobility or this accommodation. Sure.
Carolanne, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I often find that I get caught off guard a lot. For some reason, when I'm out and about and living my normal daily life, I forget that, I'm chronically ill and disabled, and this is just my normal life. So to me, I'm just doing my normal thing like anyone else would.
Yeah, you're doing your normal
and,
day.
And then I have someone come up to me and, ask, what's that thing that's hooked to your back that looks like it's connected to your stomach? Like, what is this thing?
Right.
And I'm like, wait, what thing? Like, it takes me, a moment, and I'm like, oh, and then, I realize I have to, in the simplest terms I can, explain to them how I can't eat. And to most people that seems preposterous and impossible, and they have, 20 follow-up questions. And
sure.
Yeah.
So there's some days where I have a response that is more thought out and, more well-spoken. And there's other days where I don't have the energy mentally or physically to explain to these strangers what I go through. So I have a short canned answer, and my short canned answer is I can't eat due to a chronic illness that will never go away or be cured. And so I am fed through a hole in my stomach, and that is how I survive, and that is the end of my story.
Yes. That
short
works.
To the point. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Wonderful. Well, we're getting close to wrapping up here. Couple more things I just want to get your guys' opinion on, or your lady's opinion on. Sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. I got it.
Yeah. If you could say one thing to people about chronic illness, like to all our listeners who might not know anything about chronic illness, if you could say one thing to them, what would it be and why?
I think the one thing that I would say to someone who might not be living with a disability or chronic illness specifically would be to, if you ever encounter a person with chronic illness, believe them. Mm-hmm. Believe what they say. Believe what they're telling you, believe their experiences, and see that as valid.
Sure.
There is nothing more dehumanizing and worse than someone calling you a fraud or a liar or not believing you when you go through so much pain and agony on a daily basis just to get out of bed. To have someone not believe you is heart-wrenching and can really put you in a depressed state of mind for a very long time. And people don't think about that when they say things to other people, I think.
Sure. Emily, same question.
Yeah, that was actually going to be pretty much my exact response, Carolanne, is that it's just so important to listen to someone who has a chronic illness and believe them. And even if you can't visibly see that this person is experiencing any symptoms, that doesn't mean that they aren't, dealing with complicated symptoms or having a bad day, and just that it's really important to believe someone when they say they have a chronic illness or that they're having a bad day, and that it can be really valuable to support people who have a chronic illness, and having that support system is so valuable. And just basically, listen and be empathetic and just believe someone if they tell you that they are sick, even if they look perfectly healthy to you.
Sure. Well, that's really all my questions I have. I just want to say.
Let me ask this then.
Yeah.
So Emily, I know folks here in the RVA area, which you're a part of for sure, and alumni from JMU and other folks in your life would like to reach out to you and find you somewhere in the social world. Where can they find you?
Email is always an easy way to contact me, or I guess Twitter also works.
Oh yeah, what's your Twitter handle?
Emily Deaton 12, EmilYDeaton 12.
Great, Emily Deaton 12 on the Twitter machine there. Thanks very much.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
anything you're working on now you want to plug or tell us about?
I have been doing some writing part-time, but I am always looking for new projects or different work. So yeah, any I guess if anyone knows of anything or needs help with anything, I'm always interested in, like I said, taking on new projects or things like that.
That's great, yes. Well, yeah, our listeners would very much be interested in that for sure. Carolanne, I'm turning my head to the north and looking at Pennsylvania through the magic of fiber optics and satellites. If folks want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
You can find me. I'm most active on Instagram. You can follow me. My handle is Carolanne Maria. That is CarolanneMaria. And you can also connect with me on Facebook. If you type in Carolanne Monteleone or even just the beginning of my last name, you will definitely find me. There's not too many.
I found you, and there's a beautiful portrait of you there, and the beagle. The beagle is there as well. Can't miss. And what's the name of your blog? Where can we read you?
The name of my blog is heartforhumanity.wordpress.com.
Okay.
I'm going to go check that out.
Right now.
Exactly.
Can you? I just saw on your page here you were working on something called Crafting for a Cure.
Yes, that is my Etsy business. I sew feeding tube accessories, and I sell them on Etsy for other people who have feeding tubes and central lines and things that need to be hooked up and out of the way.
That's so cool.
That's great. That's great. Well, Carolanne and Emily, both, we have a bit of a surprise for you since you've made it through the hour. Congratulations, you're now co-host.
Yes.
You can come back anytime, and you can
Thank
you can sit there and you can run the show, and I'll just run the tape machine. Haha. But it was a great evening and a great conversation, and it was a pleasure for me to sit back and listen to the three of you.
Yeah, no, and I just want to say, first of all, I very much appreciate you both for all of the work that you helped me with in my writing and doing some other things for Six Wheels. I cannot do a lot of that work without you both. And I also just appreciate your candor and openness during the conversation. I think it's really refreshing to have very open conversations around disability issues like we had. And that's what the goal of the podcast really is about. So conversations like this are so rich, and I'm just really appreciative that you're both so willing to share. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies,
Yes,
thank you
thank
very
you.
much. Thanks.
Yes.
Folks, you have been listening to the Six Wheels Consulting Disability Podcast for Carolanne Monteleone and Emily Deaton and my buddy Matthew Shapiro. This is Bob Nolly, and everyone, think inclusion and keep rolling forward. We'll see you next time.